thrill seekers. That was a little bit of a song called Calling Occupants of Interplanetary Craft, and that video was recorded entirely on location in Finland, Germany, and England during my 2024 European tour. And those people you see pretending to be my UFO culties are actually participants in the various retreats I did in Europe in 2024. And the song, probably most people know it from the Carpenters version. I found this in Germany, that it appears on their album. What's this album called? Passages. But it's originally by Klaatu, a Canadian band who rumor had it was the Beatles in disguise, although they weren't. And I unfortunately don't have a copy of that. That is missing. I need to go get a copy of that right away. But another very charming version appears on this record, the Langley School's music project, Innocence and Despair. It's another Canadian thing, where this Canadian elementary school teacher taught his kids a bunch of then contemporary rock songs. This was done in the early 70s, 76 and 77. Very cool record. You need to get that one in your collection too. So the reason I'm making a video today, I was going to actually I was going to start making videos tomorrow for this week's allotment of videos, but I decided to do one today because something came up. You remember that line in the Brady Bunch? Something came up.
Our date for Saturday night is still on, okay?
Sorry, Doug. I can't make it.
You can't?
Something suddenly came up.
Oh, I see.
Anyway, if you don't, you don't. But something came up in the comments section of my last video, which it disturbed me. Even though it's kind of an innocuous thing, maybe you'd think, but I found it kind of disturbing. And in that video, I mentioned what is called the heresy of Seneca. And we'll get into a little bit of what the heresy of Seneca is. But I want to first introduce you to these replies. 2 replies I got on the comments section about the heresy of Seneca. Because I said something in the video like, I don't know exactly who Seneca was, but it's not important, blah, blah, blah. And then I went on to talk about what Dogen calls the heresy of Seneca. This comment comes from Wind No Maid, somebody called Wind No Maid, I guess. Anyway, in the chapter Zenki, Dogen defines Zenji Seneca as the locus of enlightenment and clarifies that this locus is not merely a specific point or object, but rather the entire body that realizes enlightenment. And I'm looking at this going, huh? I'm pretty sure it doesn't say that in the chapter Zenki, but we'll get into what it says in the chapter Zenki because I want to show you the other comment and why this bothered me so much.
Moments later.
The other comment, I just noticed it's by the same person, so I thought it was 2 different people making a similar comment. But the other comment goes, I always thought that Seneca referred to an enlightened state, not a person in Dogen's teaching. Here Dogen describes the enlightened Seneca as a state of liberation where the practitioner transcends illusions and desires and achieves true freedom and insight through self-forgetting. And I asked this person where he got this, and he said, to be honest, I asked my Zen teacher, Hugging Chat. And I had to look up what Hugging Chat was, and I found out that Hugging Chat is an AI program. And yeah, it worries me that people are getting their information about Zen from AI programs these days. And honestly, I'll have to admit, it worried me more when I thought there were 2 different people getting the same weird information from AIs. But even if it's just one person, I think it's still worth pointing out. So I'm going to continue on with my video, because there's nothing like this in the chapter Zenki, which I talk about in my book Letters to a Dead Friend About Zen, which apparently is now out of print, which is kind of, I don't know. I'm unhappy with my publishers for taking this book out of print after just 4 years, because it's a good book. And I don't think they gave it a chance. But in this book, and it's going to be republished by another publisher soon. I'm going to talk to the guy probably this week about republishing the book, so don't you worry. But anyway, you may still be able to find copies of it anyhow. But the chapter I'm talking about is the whole shebang. And in this chapter, the whole shebang, I took the chapter Zenki, which is usually translated, the title is usually translated as all functions. But the reason I called it the whole shebang is I didn't make that up. My first Zen teacher, Tim McCarthy, happened to just pick this essay by Dogen out to talk about, and he called it the whole shebang, which I think is a cute title. Let's see. All functions is what Nishijima and Cross call it. Kaz Tanahashi and Ed Brown call it undivided activity. Norman Waddell and Masao Abe call it total dynamic working. And Kosen Nishiyama and John Stevens called it the total activity of life and death. Okay, so that's the title it gets. And it's in this book, Letters to a Dead Friend About Zen, because it says a lot about life and death and the difference between life and death. So let me give you some juicy quotes from my version of it. He says, "The great truth," this is Dogen via me, "the great truth, when you totally and completely get it, is breaking free and is enlightenment. By breaking free, I mean that life breaks free of life and death breaks free of death. Enlightenment is life, enlightenment is death. At the time of enlightenment, there is nothing but the total enlightenment of life, and there is nothing but the total enlightenment of death. This pivotal moment right now causes life to be life and causes death to be death. Thus, life is the whole shebang and death is the whole shebang. Life doesn't get in the way of death, and death doesn't get in the way of life. The entire earth and the whole universe are right there in life, and they're also right there in death." And so on and so forth. Maybe I should do a video talking about that, but I really want to talk about is this Seneca, and who Seneca was, because I did a lot of work looking it up. Dogen mentions Seneca in several chapters of Shobogenzo. The first is in Bendowa, where he says, "I say the view expressed now," and he's going to repeat the view that he's just criticizing, so let's get on with it, "is absolutely not the Buddha's Dharma. It is the view of the non-Buddhist Seneca. According to that non-Buddhist view, there is one spiritual intelligence existing within our body. When this intelligence meets conditions, it can discriminate between pleasant and unpleasant, discriminate between right and wrong, and it can know pain and irritation, suffering and pleasure. All these abilities are those of the spiritual intelligence. When this body dies, however, the spirit casts off the skin and is reborn on the other side. So even though it seems to die here, it lives on there. Therefore, we call it immortal and eternal. This is the view of the non-Buddhist Seneca. If we learn this view as the Buddha's Dharma, we are even more foolish than a person who grasps a tile or a pebble thinking it to be a golden treasure. The delusion would be too shameful for comparison." And the quote that I gave you in my previous video comes from Sokushin Zeibutsu, Mind Here and Now is Buddha. And here he says, there was a non-Buddhist in India called Seneca whose viewpoint is expressed as follows: "The great truth exists in our own body now, so we can easily recognize its situation. In other words, a spiritual intelligence distinguishes between pain and pleasure, etc., etc." And he denounces that view as a mistake. And then in Busho, which is Buddha nature, he says, "Hearing the word Buddha nature, many students have misunderstood it to be like the self described by the non-Buddhist Seneca." And here he doesn't explain Seneca's view, but he is, I guess, assumes his listeners have already heard it, probably from him. And in an essay called Shizen Bhikkhu, which is Bhikshu, which is a Buddhist monk in the fourth dhyana, let's not worry about what that is right now, he says, "The stupid and dull living beings of the eastern lands must not indiscriminately turn their backs on the Buddhist teaching." Eastern lands means his own people. He's talking about the people of his place. Must not turn their backs on the Buddhist teaching and say that their truths equal to the Buddha's truth. La-di-da-di-da. That would be just like slandering the Buddha and slandering the Dharma. People of the Western Heavens, which is China, from Deerhead and Debating Power, to those are names, I guess, to the Brahmin Long Nails, those are names of people, and the Brahmin Seneca, and so on. These were people of wide learning, such as have never existed since ancient times in the eastern lands. Kung Tzu and Lao Tzu, Kung Tzu is Confucius, Lao Tzu is Lao Tzu, could never equal them. All of them discarded their own truths and took refuge in the Buddhist truth, which is a reference to what I'm about to tell you, which is that Seneca eventually comes around to agreeing with the Buddha about this whole deal about self and so on. So, according to Nishijima and Cross's notes, this non-Buddhist Seneca first appears in this monster, the Flower Ornament Sutra, also known as the Avatamsaka Sutra. Now, I went through this thing, I have it on a PDF, and I went through trying to find anything like Seneca, Senika, in this book, and it turned up nothing, and I tried some other things looking for quotations about the self and the nature of self, and I tried a bunch of things, and I spent, like last week when I said I don't spend much time on these Buddhism videos, that was a lie, because this morning I spent a lot of time trying to find the reference to Seneca in this book, and I could not find it. If anybody knows where it is out there, any of you Buddhist scholars watching, or if you can use your chat, your AIs to find it, I can't find it. But I also found references online to the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, which is an early Buddhist sutra, in which Seneca features prominently. And one of the big quotes, well, let me give you the quote that Dogen appears to be referring to, and this is Seneca speaking. He says, "O Gautama, the self," Gautama is the Buddha, obviously, "the self I speak of exists in what is created and yet what is eternal. O Gautama, a person happens to cause a fire in the house, the master of the house comes out, so we cannot say, when the house is reduced to ashes, the master of the house is also reduced to ashes. It is the same with what I say. This created body is non-eternal, but when the non-eternal is about to start out, i.e. when the body is about to die, the self goes out. So the self I speak of is all-pervading and eternal." So that's the thing that Dogen appears to be refuting. And one of the kind of interesting quotes that comes up in this very, very long discussion between Seneca and the Buddha is this one. Seneca said, "O Gautama, you say that there is no self and nothing that belongs to self. Then why do you speak of the eternal, bliss, the self, and the pure?" So why does he say no self, and why does he also say self? And the Buddha here in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra replies, the Buddha said, "Nobly born one," that means he's talking to Seneca, "I have never taught that the 6 inner and outer sense spheres and the 6 consciousnesses are eternal, blissful, the self, or pure." This gets into some stuff that you'd have to look up in Yogacara Buddhism about the 6 sense spheres and the 6 consciousnesses. Actually, there's 7 or 8 in some versions. Anyway, but I do declare that the cessation of the 6 inner and outer sense spheres and the 6 consciousness arising from them is the eternal. So the cessation is eternal. Because that is eternal, it is the self. Because there is eternity and the self, it is termed blissful. Because it is eternal, the self and blissful, it is termed pure. Nobly born one, ordinary people abhor suffering, and by eliminating the cause of suffering, they may freely, spontaneously distance themselves from it. This is termed the self. Therefore, I have spoken of the eternal, the self, the blissful, and the pure, which is, oh my God, I'm not even going to try to unpack that in a 20-minute video. Maybe I should do a 20-minute video just on that, and perhaps I will now that I've read it and talked about it. If you guys want it, I'll see if I can unpack it. But the idea is, well, it's kind of this whole deal with self and no self and self, in Mahayana Buddhism and a little bit in previous forms of Buddhism. There is, in Mahayana Buddhism especially, there's a lot of talk about the self, and Dogen does this all the time. He talks about Jiko, but then Buddhism also has this idea of non-self, and here is where they're trying their best to try to explain why they talk about self and non-self, and even though these are totally contradictory, oh my God, don't even think about it. Just do your meditation and deal with it. But the whole thing about people getting their Buddhism from AI is kind of worries me, because I've met in my traveling and talked to people who are actually doing this, who are actually using AI thingy-mabobs to try to study Buddhism, and I just think they're totally unreliable. And the way I think of it is, I've got a few people who orbit in my life who are know-it-alls, and maybe you do too. And a know-it-all is often, in my judgment, a person who knows a lot. They usually know a lot about either one subject, or they know a lot about a bunch of subjects. And they like to kind of hold court and tell people about all the things they know about the subjects that they know about. But one thing I've noticed about the know-it-alls in my life is they seem to have a complete inability to ever admit that they don't know something. So if something comes up that they don't know, what they'll tend to do, the people I know will tend to do, is make something up, so as to preserve their image of being the person who knows everything. They'll just make something up. And I had to deal with one of these people on a professional level a number of years ago, who I was working on a book that he actually wrote, and I was doing the corrections and stuff. And what I had to do often was, because he knew so much about the subject he was writing about, I had to actually do a lot of work to ferret out the places where he'd just kind of filled in a gap that he didn't know by just making something up, and that was a lot of work. So yeah, that happens, and I think these AI programs are kind of the same way. Like, if they don't know something, they'll just put something together. I mean, they don't consciously do this the way a person does, but maybe they're programmed by know-it-alls who program them that way to just make something up if they can't find the answer. So there you go. So don't learn your Buddhism from AIs. Go, if you really want to learn Buddhist philosophy, there's plenty of books. There's plenty of good websites and things online. Terabes, who I probably shouldn't advertise, but they are a Hungarian-based website that has PDF files of just about every book that has ever been printed on Buddhism. And even though they steal my own books and put them up as PDF files on their website, which they shouldn't do, they also have provided a great resource for me, because a lot of the books that they put up as PDFs are either impossible to find or impossibly expensive to buy. So I really do appreciate the work they do there, although I don't appreciate them putting my books up for free for people to just download. So there you go, Terabes, if you're watching. That's what I think of you. So there you go. All right, that's just a little video about the Seneca and why you shouldn't trust AI to tell you about Buddhism. So if you liked what you heard, and I wanted to show this off. I think I've shown this before. My Misfits t-shirt. As you know, or maybe you don't know, probably you don't know, my band, the band I was in the early 80s and that I'm still in today, Zero Defects, we opened for the Misfits in Akron, Ohio, and I'm going to prove it because it says right here on the back. I hope you can see this, because I'm not going to be able to see. But I think you can see that it says Akron, Ohio somewhere on there as one of the places they played. So that's the Misfits. We opened for them in Akron, Ohio. Hey, when I made that video, I forgot to do my usual begging for money. So if you want to send a donation to me, you can go to the URL that you're seeing on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. That's where you will find my PayPal and Patreon links. Those are my main and usually only ways of making a living. And I appreciate your support, but as always, you don't got to support me. If you don't want to support me, okay, here's back to me. All right, we will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Hey Ziggy, what do you think of that? Do you use chat? Do you use not chat? What is it called? AI to look up cats and look up treats? No? All right. Well, maybe you should. All right. We'll go edit the video. Okay.